You argue that the university's race-conscious admission plan is not necessary to achieve a diverse student body because it admits so few people, so few minorities. And I had trouble with that reading the brief. I said, well, if it's so few, then what's the problem?
Well, it's a question.
Then let's assume that it resulted in the admission of many minorities. Then you come back and say, oh, well, this shows that we were probably wrongly excluded. I see an inconsistency here. Are you saying that you shouldn't impose this hurt or this injury generally for so little benefit? Is that the point?
Yes, that's part of it. The second is the question of reasonably available alternatives. If we take Texas at its word and says they are satisfied, they are happy going on with the way they apply race today, we tried to measure, well, what difference is it making, and could you achieve the same thing with a reasonably available race-neutral alternative? That's a question that was asked in Grutter. They were supposed to analyze that. They didn't look at it.
Perhaps you could summarize by saying, by telling us, from your point of view, this plan fails strict scrutiny on one or two or both levels. A, because the objective is inappropriate or ill-defined, and B, because of the implementation is defective. Which or both of those are you arguing?
We have argued both, and we continue to argue both. It is not a necessary.
And in what respect does this plan fail strict scrutiny under under both of those categories?
Okay. Under the category, the first category, was it a necessary means of pursuing a compelling interest? We don't believe they've shown any necessity for doing what they were doing. And certainly race should have been a last resort. It was a first resort. That's, in a nutshell, that prong of it. And they failed in every respect. If you go to narrow tailoring, what we're saying is they didn't consider alternatives.
Well, I thought that the whole purpose of affirmative action was to help students who come from underprivileged backgrounds. But you make a very different argument that I don't think I've ever seen before. The top 10% plan admits lots of African American, lots of Hispanics, and a fair number of African Americans. But you say, well, it's faulty because it doesn't admit enough African Americans and Hispanics who come from privileged backgrounds. And you specifically have the example of the child of successful professionals in Dallas. Now that's your argument. If you have an applicant whose parents are, let's say one of them is a partner in your law firm in Texas, another one is another corporate lawyer. They have income that puts them in the top 1% of earners in the country, and their parents both have graduate degrees. They deserve a leg up against, let's say, an Asian or a white applicant whose parents are absolutely average in terms of education and income?
No, Your Honor. And let me answer the question. First of all, the example comes almost word for word from the Harvard plan that this Court approved in Grutter and that Justice Powell held out.
Well, how can the answer to that question be no? Because being an African American or being a Hispanic is a plus factor.
Because, Your Honor, our point is that we want minorities from different backgrounds. We go out of our way to recruit minorities from disadvantaged backgrounds.
What you're saying is that what counts is race above all.
No, Your Honor. What counts is different experiences.
That's the necessary response to Justice Alito's question.
Well, Your Honor, what we want is different experiences that are going to come on campus.
Underprivileged of a certain race and privileged of a certain race. That's race.
No, Your Honors, it's not race. It's just the opposite. I mean, in the LULAC decision, for example, this Court said that failing to take into account differences among members of the same race does a disservice.
But the reason you're reaching for the privileged is so that members of that race who are privileged can be representative, and that's race.
It's members of the same racial group, Your Honor, bringing different experiences, and to say that if you took any racial group, if you had an admissions process that only tended to admit people from a particular background or perspective, you would want people from different perspectives.